So birthright citizenship will be decided in October in the next session. However, it indirectly impacts us because, as you correctly pointed out, if there's a birthright citizenship case in Oregon, it will only affect the plaintiff in Oregon, not the entire country. So yes, it's indirectly, but that's pending litigation, and we're waiting on that in the next term. We're very confident in the Supreme Court, but again, it's pending litigation, and that will directly be determined in October, but it indirectly impacts every case in this country, and we're thrilled with their decision today.
Attorney General Pam Bondi earlier today at the White House reacting to the Supreme Court's decision we've been discussing to limit the power of judges to block government policies nationwide, and also the court's decision to leave President Trump's push for restrictions on birthright citizenship unresolved, at least for now. With our eyes on October, as the Attorney General just mentioned, we turn here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Live to Capitol Hill, Democratic Congressman Sam Liccardo of California. He's a member of the House Financial Services Committee as well, a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Congressman, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. Our audience should know that you are an attorney, and I'm wondering your thought on what really happens here, because, again, the court did not directly address birthright citizenship, but the president himself today said, thanks to this decision, we can now promptly proceed with numerous policies wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis, including ending birthright citizenship. So what's about to happen in October?
Well, what we know from the opinion is that there's a 30-day stay on the implementation of this emergency order from the president. But really, there's much more to this, obviously. Look, every American is entitled to equal protection under the law. That's what our Constitution tells us. In this case, we have a 14th Amendment by its plain language that tells every baby, every child born in this country, you are a citizen. And that has been the interpretation of now 7 federal courts in the last year that have said the 14th Amendment, the Constitution, means what it says. And for 127 years, the U.S. Supreme Court holding has been that this provision of the 14th Amendment means what it says. Now, as a result of this decision, the Supreme Court, the Constitution only means what it says in those very limited areas where a litigant has actually litigated this emergency order, or the executive order, rather. In the rest of the country, this executive order will be the law, despite the fact that it is nearly uniformly viewed as being violative of the Constitution. That's astounding.
Well, so what exactly do you expect to happen, Congressman? The Attorney General was actually asked about this in the news conference at the White House. What do you do with a newborn baby, for example, that may no longer be entitled to birthright citizenship automatically? What is it that you actually expect to see in California and across the country, knowing that the Supreme Court didn't outright say the 14th Amendment is not applicable in those cases?
That's right. There was no ruling on the merits, and for good reason, of course. That would have been even more astounding, given what the language of the 14th Amendment clearly says. But what it means is that there's going to be litigants in every district in this country that are now going to be bringing claims, clogging up the courts on decisions, frankly, that are well settled. But nonetheless, every one of those litigants will try to race to get a holding in place to be able to protect their own communities. Or alternatively, there's going to be, and I think in addition, there's going to be an effort to create a class, that is, through a class action. That class certification process is very time-consuming. It's very expensive. It may take 6 to 18 months in many cases. That means that the federal courts become really irrelevant to respond immediately when there are constitutional violations that need immediate response.
I know, Congressman, this is sensitive stuff, but the president said a lot of things today and framed the 14th Amendment, to use his words, quote, it was meant for the babies of slaves, unquote, knowing, of course, that the amendment was an outcropping of the Civil War. What would be your response to his view on that?
Our Constitution and this provision in the 14th Amendment is meant to protect every child born in this country. That's what it says. We are all U.S. citizens. And there can be no more divisive act for a political leader in this country than to say, those of you who have long been deemed to be U.S. citizens are no longer. That's an outrage.
Well, Congressman, as we consider that this is just one part of the administration's wider efforts on questions of migration and immigration, knowing there have been favorable court rulings from the Supreme Court in that regard as well, at least allowing the administration for the time being to continue with some of its deportations, what is the aggregate effect that it is having on communities who either have already come to the United States seeking refuge or are thinking about doing so, applying for asylum, immigration trends as a whole, in your mind?
Well, I think this is devastating to our country and its future. Look, I represent Silicon Valley. I was the mayor of a city where 40% of our adults were born in a foreign country. And that, frankly, is the secret of our success, attracting the best and the brightest from around the world that drive innovation, that drive the next generation of thinking. If you are no longer the place where the best and the brightest from around the world want to come, you are, by definition, a declining civilization. What we are doing is telling the rest of the world that we're more interested in walls than we are in investing in an extraordinary future that we have seen created through immigration in our country.
Congressman, I know that you're going to be having a couple of days, it looks like, to work next week that might creep up on the recess for the 4th of July, because this reconciliation bill is coming back your way. It appears we're waiting for a final version to come out of the Senate. And before you joined us, we spoke with your Republican colleague from New York, Mike Lawler, who is celebrating a new deal on SALT, which looks fairly similar to the original deal on SALT. In California, almost 3 million taxpayers, 15% of those who file taxes in the state, claim that deduction in 2022. Is this good news for you and people in your district?
Well, certainly we need better tax provisions than what we saw in the 2017 law to ensure that middle-income homeowners can reduce their tax burden, as we see now through this change in SALT. But the truth is that President Trump painted his party into a corner by promising $5 trillion of tax goodies that he had no idea how to pay for. And what we're watching now is all the machinations around how they're going to invent ways to pay for tax giveaways that they simply are putting on the credit card. This is just debt that they're putting on our children, trillions of dollars of debt. And I think Republicans who have long believed in fiscal responsibility should be ashamed.
Well, Republicans obviously are having to navigate, at least in the Senate, the processing and advice of the parliamentarian. In your mind, has this parliamentarian, with various rulings, including around issues like Medicaid, made this legislative package more palatable?
Well, what she has done is she's made it more legal, regardless of whether you think her rulings are good or bad. And let's face it, there were plenty of Democrats who were complaining the last time the parliamentarian was weighing in 4 years ago on another package. I think it's important that she simply be the umpire and call the balls and strikes as she sees them. And I think she's done a fair job of that. The responsibility, it seems to me, of the Republican majority and any majority in Congress is to make sure you're putting forward a package that's legal. Obviously, that wasn't done at the outset. A lot of promises were made that nobody had any idea how to keep. And that's reflected in what we're seeing now with this last-minute jockeying.
All right, Democratic Congressman Sam Liccardo of California, thank you so much for joining us and reminding us of some important context. In 2021, we did see Democrats calling for the firing of the parliamentarian over a decision around the $15 minimum wage.